Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Parent Education Series sponsored by Konick and Associates. My name is Dr. Lisa Konick, and I'm a clinical psychologist and founder of Konick and Associates, which is a group practice specializing in child and family behavioral health and psychological assessment services. This is the first of our Parent Education Series on navigating the ever-changing educational climate during COVID. And we are sponsoring this free event for families in our community who have a lot of questions that we hope to answer related to education and the remote learning or hybrid learning or variations in learning that you might be experiencing as a parent in your school district. And today I have with me Pepi Silverman, who is Director of Bridge Educational Advocacy. Thank you for joining us today, Pepi. Pepi is an expert in education and IEP planning, and she's going to be talking to us about supporting the special education and educational needs and IEP needs of students during this time. So we are going to be talking about some specific questions that have been posed by our families in our community, but also please feel free to post questions in our chat and we will be happy to respond to those. I want to make a caveat here. This is a free event. We are sponsoring this on live. We have been informed that there have been scammers posting links to provide payment information. Please do not do that. This is not a paid event. So we will be kind of watching out for those. I want to introduce Pepi, and then I'm going to let her speak a bit about what she's experiencing with special education right now. Pepi is an educator, administrator, university professor, and parent of a child with special needs, and an educational advocate who has dedicated her life to supporting the rights of all children. She has sat on all sides of the conference table, understands all of the rules and each participant's responsibilities, and brings that understanding to her work as an advocate. Having worked in public schools at both the elementary and high school levels for the last 25 years, she understands the system, knows the language, and can help to facilitate the conversations necessary to achieve positive outcomes for students. Pepi founded Bridge Educational Advocacy to extend herself and her knowledge and experience to support families needing assistance in order to work effectively with their school districts. And we'll be providing some information at the end of our talk about how you can contact Pepi directly. Pepi, welcome to our talk today. We are happy to have you here as an expert in education.
Thank you so much. If anyone would have said to me at the early part of my career, or even 2 years ago, that we'd be talking live on Facebook about how to manage remote learning, I would have said no. There's no way that all the schools in the United States would be dealing with such an unusual circumstance. But unusual circumstances give us opportunities too. So parents have a much more insightful perspective on their children's learning. They've been much more involved in their children's learning. And that gives us that opportunity to build a stronger partnership with the school team on behalf of your children. But everyone should know that all the protections that have been in place with regard to students with IEPs, with regards to students with 504 plans, and even with regards to general education students for whom there may be educational concerns or questions, the state and federal school regulations are still in place. And all of those protections that would have been there for any family, any student, are still in place even today during remote learning. So that's a really important piece that parents need to be aware of.
And I think as many parents that are tuning in may be thinking, we've had a lot of very stressed families in our practice. We do work with a lot of elementary age through high school and even into college students. And there's a lot of variability in terms of how different school districts and even within school districts programs are being presented. And I think the uncertainty has been very stressful for families and parents, and trying to figure out how to work at home or maybe not work at home and manage their kids on a remote learning platform has been stressful for both kids and families. Pepi, one of the questions that we are hearing a lot from our parents is, hey, I'm not a special educator. My kids are in special ed. How do I keep my kids from falling behind? And that seems to be a primary question and fear.
So being able to monitor and measure student performance has always been critically important. It's even more so now. What happened last spring was the State Board of Education said to school districts, this is an unprecedented event. We're all going to have to be flexible with each other, and students should not be quote unquote harmed as a result of having to participate in remote learning. So grading practices were suspended last spring. But again, for students with IEPs, for students with 504s, what would have otherwise been traditional progress monitoring should still have been in place. Many schools didn't understand it to be that way. So my first piece of advice for families is look at your child's performance before the school closures. So that's usually there's usually a progress update at the end of January, beginning of February, maybe at the semester, and use that as a starting point. Now, with schools resuming, there is a huge emphasis on what the Illinois State Board of Ed is describing as capturing lost learning. So go back to your school team, ask your school team how they are going to be measuring student performance at the start of the school year, compare it to the last measurement, which may have been in late January or early February, and you'll begin to have a metric that you can look at to say, did my child stay the same? Did my child's scores go down? If so, then we collaborate with the school team to say, what are we going to do? And to create a plan of action to bridge whatever gaps may have occurred. But it's going to be a gap potentially, not just for students with special needs, but probably for the majority of students. So schools will need to have a plan for how they're going to use the beginning of the school year to recapture some of the performance data that may have declined as a result of last spring.
Great tip. I think that's really reassuring to have some type of metric involved, because then we did lose, we're thinking about losses since March, and not everybody had the opportunity to, engage in any kind of enrichment over summer. It was very stressful. And the metrics and the ability for children, I think, to engage in a remote learning platform has varied significantly, depending on age and need. So that's a great tip. One of the things, and it sounds like you've already answered this question, but I want you to speak it loud and clear. Is my IEP and or 504 plan still in effect?
It absolutely is in effect. There was questions last spring about whether some of the waivers, whether there should be waivers to some of the IDEA protections. And Secretary DeVos met with Congress and said there should not be any waivers. So those protections are in place. Some timelines were extended, such as if your child was was beginning to participate in an assessment activity, they may have needed to extend a timeline. But the basic schedules, the basic routines, the basic obligation of monitoring and measuring an IEP or a 504 plan have stayed in place and continue to be so.
And this is, an interesting question, Pepi. When we're thinking about IEPs, there's so many layers involved. There can be occupational therapy services, social work services, speech and language. Do you have some suggestions for how you're seeing kids' IEPs being implemented in this remote environment that parents can think about if they're thinking about flexible ways to get those services in home?
So particularly as it relates to therapy services, one of the issues is, just like what we're doing today, we're talking on a screen. And while we're gaining comfort level with it, there are certain things that just can't be done on a screen. So thinking about how activities could be modified. For example, for young children, they often benefit from hands-on activities. So I've worked with school teams to put together project boxes, and parents can either come to the school, or last year I had some very creative, very thoughtful teachers who actually would go to some of her students' homes and drop off a box on their front door. So they had no contact with each other, but it would have been the same learning or the same activities that they were attempting to do remotely. But with project boxes, they had manipulatives, they had different kinds of activities that could be hands-on. And then the teacher might supervise those hands-on activities online. but the students were able to engage directly with activities. That is particularly helpful for fine motor tasks that an occupational therapist might be doing. It might be very helpful with regard to physical therapy. There might be, I've had families set up obstacle courses in their den where students could practice ascending or descending stairs. And the therapist is still participating, but the therapist is monitoring, but we're not expecting to have a verbal conversation about how we might engage in a fine or a gross motor activity. So if the school isn't proposing some of those ideas to you, those can be suggestions that you can share back and say, could we try it this way to incorporate what might be more developmentally appropriate in terms of direct activities?
That's a great idea. Now, what about, and I think some of these interventions, these pullouts that kids might be getting, for example, reading interventions, math interventions, do you have any thoughts about how they can be flexibly integrated? And one of the challenges that I'm hearing from a lot of our parents, particularly kids with, autistic spectrum disorders or inattentive issues or younger children, is they're not really engaging in that remote. They're overstimulated by the screen, by the classroom, and parents are finding that they're under the table or they're crawling around in the room. They're just not receptive to the remote learning. So I kind of embedded two questions there. Do you have any thoughts about how those two things might be addressed for parents when they're talking to their teen?
Well, a couple of things. First, last spring, as schools were learning how to provide any type of online instruction, the quantity of time that students were expected to be online was much shorter. Now schools are attempting to follow what would be a more traditional school schedule, which means that students as young as kindergarten age are sometimes being asked to participate in online instruction for 5, 6.5 hours. And I'd say that's hard for anyone, but what I've been able to work out with families is developing a process to determine what is a reasonable amount of time for your child to engage in an activity. So if a typical language arts lesson would be 45 minutes to an hour, but we think we can get a really good sense of instructional engagement in 20 minutes, then maybe we modify the duration of the lesson to be a good 20 minutes rather than a really difficult 45-minute to 60-minute lesson. So trying to determine what amount of time a child could sustain their attention. The second piece, similar to what I mentioned about related services or therapies, when we're talking about reading activities, many families are asking the school, can I have a copy of the textbooks to keep at home so that they're not having to literally look at the screen to engage in their curriculum? So if the student could read independently, or if there's assistive technology in place where a student could have a digital text and listen to the materials, maybe in a social studies lesson, then they don't have to be staring at the screen to engage in that activity. They can listen or read independently at a different time of the day and then log into the social studies lesson later after having read the material instead of trying to read the material online. So I think managing what is the learning objective of a given lesson across the subject areas, and then say, do we have to be online for that full duration? If we can learn about the subject area and break that lesson into parts so that the student is maybe listening to the teacher presentation. And in a traditional classroom, a teacher presentation or a teacher introduction to a lesson might be 15 or 20 minutes of a 60-minute period, and then students are going to be doing independent work. So some students are turning their cameras off, so they're still kind of involved, but they're not staring at the screen. They're doing independent work. There's also opportunities for what they call breakout rooms. So sometimes student will step out, be in a separate breakout room, so they're still online, but they're not on view with the rest of their classmates. That's another piece that is really causing a lot of student stress, and sometimes that's why they're hiding under the table. They feel like everyone's staring at them, and they see a series of boxes on their screen, and that makes them really uncomfortable. So determining amount of time and determining whether we can break lessons up into parts makes a big difference.
I think that the stimulation, like you said, with the boxes is, we see a lot of high school students like, you know, they're just down halfway. They don't want to, and I hear a lot of turn your screens on, please.
Yep.
You know, kids are, they don't want that stimulation that everybody can see me. So those are some good suggestions, Pepi. Thank you. There's some questions about evaluations. So we know that part of the IEP process is getting an assessment, and some of that involves a in-school observation in the classroom. Some people were in the process of maybe requesting a domain meeting or an assessment prior to March, and everything has been backlogged now. So some of the questions that we're getting, and maybe you could talk about the assessment process a little bit and help people understand if they were considering a request to their school for special ed, or they were up for a reevaluation or requesting an evaluation for special ed services, what should they expect at this point, and how should they proceed?
Well, that's been a big question. And last spring, when schools first closed, most school districts suspended what they called in-person assessments. So when you're talking about an assessment activity, not every assessment instrument needs to be an in-person administration. So there might be some parts of the assessment, like a behavior rating scale, which is documentation that parents fill out, that teachers fill out, sometimes depending on the age of the student the student might fill out about themselves. So you don't have to be in person for that. You mentioned direct observation. That's still challenging because most schools are going remote. But I have also seen, just like we're talking online today, sometimes some observations are done where the team is watching the student interacting with their family or engaged in another type of activity, and they're watching that online versus being in person. And especially for very young children, I'd say 5 or younger, that still allows the opportunity of gathering observational information. But the really good news is now schools are participating in in-person assessments, but they're following all the safety guidelines that we would otherwise expect given the pandemic. So students and staff are wearing PPE. A lot of schools have purchased plexiglass screens. So 2 people could be sitting across the table from each other, but that plexiglass screen offers more protection for the staff member and the student. And they're able to administer some of the more traditional instruments that were sort of, I wouldn't say were stopped, but maybe were paused last spring. But the bottom line is last spring, right now, or into the future, if you have concerns about your child's performance, ask for an evaluation. And then collaboratively with the team, the school team, you'll talk about, there are 9 domains: academic, functional, cognitive, health, a vision screening, a hearing screening, communication, motor, and motor includes fine motor, gross motor, and even sensory processing, and social emotional. And so you go domain by domain by domain, and you determine the best way to gather information. And some of that you don't have to be in person to gather, and you talk together with the school personnel. Sometimes your private clinicians, sometimes family, their therapists, and many therapists started providing in-person therapy or telehealth even during the early parts of the pandemic. So sometimes what a school team might not have been able to gather, the private clinicians can share with the school team to augment the information that they would otherwise have, and you can proceed with the assessment.
And I appreciate that input, Pepi. We actually do, in our practice, similarly offer some assessment assistance. And some of the things that we've been doing as a clinic and as a practice, since we have been doing some in-person work and some telehealth, is we can collect some of this data from the kids, from the parents. We have documented notes that we can talk to the schools about to share how the kids are responding, what their stress levels are. And clinicians such as psychologists or even some of your therapists and social workers that you might be working with can collect that rating scale data, which is scoreable data, and share that with the school to see how the things that have transpired since March have been going, and then also what changes might be experienced in this fall semester starting off. So the data is important. Another suggestion that we've had, Pepi, and maybe you've been talking to families about this too, are when kids are kind of melting down, they may not be having the same experience with remote learning that they would in the classroom. So we might be seeing kids that have functioned pretty well in a structured classroom setting who are now home, and home is not school. So that mental shift isn't occurring. This is not where I do my learning. And parents are having a lot of difficulty getting kids to participate in learning at home because this is just kind of blowing their mind, right? This is not where I learn, is really trying to set some structure at home, and at least for parts of the day that those kids are going to be needing to be engaging with a learning process, is to set some structured time in the home environment, and we work with them on scheduling. The other thing that I think is really important is those motor breaks, especially for our younger kiddos who need to get up and move, and they can't just sit. So Pepi, you were mentioning some of the school educational programming is maybe 15 or 20 minutes on screen followed by some off-screen work. That might be a great time to give your kid a motor break. Let them run around, get them up, do some jumping jacks, take the dog outside. And I think also mimicking some of the things that we're missing in school, like recess. Can you do, and PE, kids aren't getting those motor activities in their school setting, but parents, if they're home or their caregivers, can take the kids outside and mimic recess and mimic some of those activities that they might be getting in the school setting.
And that's where we talk about creative problem solving. So many classrooms have lots of different seating options, ball chairs, move and sit cushions. Schools are now starting to implement either standing desks or desks that can be adjusted up and down. And I've had some families reach out to their school and say, could I swing by the office and pick up a ball chair? It would make so much of a difference. So that communication and that collaboration help to make the learning as productive as it can be in a difficult time.
The other thing that I'm seeing some of our parents do to kind of think outside of the box is we're looking at what's the curriculum, what are the kids learning? If they're learning fractions, for example, and they're really having a hard time at home, we're looking at some adaptive skill-based learning. Hey, it's lunchtime. Let's plan the menu. Let's cook something. Let's measure. Like getting children involved in those adaptive functional behaviors can be really beneficial to enhancing some of the learning that they might not be experiencing in school.
Absolutely.
Another question that we had, Pepi, was what about students that might have had a classroom aide or a one-on-one aide as part of their IEP, and now they're doing remote work? How does that transition or translate?
That's an excellent question, and that's probably one of the first things that came up last spring was school districts didn't quite know what to do with the paraprofessionals they had on staff. We've since evolved. There's a better understanding. So if your child was in a co-taught class, or your child had an instructional assistant that was coming into the classroom, we're now having those same supports come to remote learning. So that paraprofessional is present in the large classroom presentation, and then that might be a time where the paraprofessional and the student either set up a separate appointment after the lesson to do a review, or that's where the implementation of some of these breakout rooms are coming into play. Because again, it feels like everyone's looking at you based on how the screen presents itself. But when they are in a breakout room, no one else can see them. And that's where a paraprofessional and a student can do the same kind of review that they used to do in person, where a paraprofessional would approach a student, maybe sit down next to them, reread the directions, go through some guided practice together. That can happen in a breakout setting that's still online. Again, thinking about the capacity of the student, just if the student can only manage being online for 15 or 20 minutes, then maybe there's a follow-up appointment with the paraprofessional who was a part of the online instruction, so that she or he can then review it with the student at a later time during the day. But we really are looking at the IEPs and the times in which we used paraprofessionals, and reintegrating that same format back into a remote learning schedule.
So kids are still getting their aids in a sense. It's just looking a little more creative with the remote process. And I understand for some parents, you know, attentional issues are particularly difficult because the kids are needing that prompting, and that is going to be a bit of a challenge to do virtually.
Mm-hmm.
So there are just some benefits, but also some limitations with the remote process. Another question that we had were, do you have any suggestions for students with this assisted technology and as it pertains to remote learning?
So assistive technology, both remote and in person, offers tremendous opportunities. Almost what used to be a very specialized software program is now pretty much built into most laptops and Chromebooks. So there are add-ons that are not necessarily a separate software program that will read text that's on screen for a student, that can read emails to students, because a lot of information between students and teachers are now being exchanged back and forth via email. But the piece that's really critical that I don't think a lot of schools are necessarily utilizing to its best advantage is training. So if your child had assistive technology and assistive technology was something that was beneficial, it looks different in remote learning. Locating where supplemental handouts might be in a Google Classroom space is not necessarily intuitively obvious. So I'm hearing a lot of families say, my child's okay online, but sometimes there's different logins for different programs. One class might have 3 different programs going on. So they're logged into Google Classroom, and then they've got to log into 2 other programs while also maintaining. So they've got split screens going on. And we're not necessarily providing training to kids on how to manage that, because before they just would log in on their program and they weren't having to see their teacher virtually at the same time. So I'm helping a lot of families by requesting that additional training be provided not only to the student, but also to the parents who are helping to facilitate this, because there's a glitch, there's a problem, they call mom or dad to help them, and then mom or dad doesn't know how to use the program, so they can't help them. So, and that can literally be written into a remote learning plan, which most schools are drafting now, to make sure that someone from the technology team provides the family with additional support so they can use these programs to their fullest advantage.
This is such an unprecedented time with all of these additional layers, and I think we're kind of uncovering glitches as we navigate it. So it's, you know, really been in some ways frustrating, but I think we're really trying to help people be flexible and adaptable here. And that may be part of that silver lining, is we are being very, very creative and adaptive in this process. One of the other questions we had, Pepi, was how can the social emotional needs of students be met with this remote learning? Do you have any thoughts about that for parents?
Just this morning, I was in a meeting where the family was talking about how much their student was really missing the social connections. And as a part of the scheduled day, there's an hour-long lunch where usually all the kids log off and they, you know, go into their kitchens or wherever in their home, and they have lunch. And the mom said, well, could some other kids maybe have a Zoom meeting and eat with their friends online? And the school team was really receptive and open to that. So creating those opportunities where kids can interact socially with each other during times that are not intended to be instruction. So whether that's lunch, sometimes related service personnel like speech therapists and social workers are creating social group opportunities, and they're using the group dynamic as not only a therapeutic tool, but an opportunity for kids to socialize.
And that would have been like the lunch bunches that we see in some kids' IEPs, I think, which was a great time for those kids to connect and have that guided lunch with a social worker. So that's still
can still happen.
Oh, good, good. So, you know, and I know there are some limitations. We do see kids that, you know, their anxiety is either up because they're not seeing their kids and having their extracurriculars, or on the contrary, we see kids that are socially stressed and their anxiety is down significantly because of the remote learning environment. So, you know, it's working for some and not others. Last question that we have, well, actually we have 2 other questions. One is, what about parents who are so frustrated with the remote process? Their kids are not translating well, and they're saying, you know what, I'm wondering if I should just pull my kids out and homeschool them.
So in some ways it feels like homeschooling. And I think there is comfort in validating all of those people's feelings. That said, you are entitled, and this counts for everybody. We choose where we live when we have school-age children based on the school district that is in that community. And so what I'm hearing a lot of people saying to me is, I don't want to bother anybody. I know it's so hard for everybody. And that's really thoughtful and nice. But the best way for the schools to be able to support what's going on during this remote learning process is to really have ongoing and open communication. So I'm encouraging families, obviously, to contact the school team whenever there's an urgent concern, but we don't have to wait until it's an urgent concern. Let's set up a schedule to touch base with each other, whether it's every week or every other week, just to update, and sort of knowing that you don't have to wait until it's terrible to ask for help can be a great stress reliever, to just know we're going to communicate with each other, good, bad, or indifferent, and we're going to stay in touch so that we can get real-time supports as needed and not wait until you're so frustrated that you're ready to just give up.
And one of my concerns with families who are thinking homeschooling is just pulling my kids out and teaching them at home on my own is you're now, removing your child from the district and from the services that would be otherwise available to you. And when you want to go back into the district, the problem might be that you now don't have any data. And I think that that's another area that when we see kids get pulled out for homeschooling and then they try to go back in and request special education services, there is no data on their learning process during that time frame that they were homeschooled. Pepi, are you seeing some of that difficulty in your space when families are looking for special ed supports?
So I would give a couple pieces of sort of concrete guidance to alleviate the stress. If eligibility is determined, then that eligibility stays in place for up to 3 years. So if it is necessary for any number of reasons to switch to a homebound situation, and you have active eligibility, as long as you're within that 3-year period, that can resume when you come back. An IEP is an annual document. So I've had some students who have needed different kinds of therapeutic service, and sometimes they go into a more specialized program to support maybe a mental health issue, and they might be absent from school for a month. They're going to come back to an active IEP. So they might not have specific data as it would have otherwise been gathered on the IEP during that month that they were absent, but they didn't lose anything. It stays in place. Now, if you're absent from school for a period that extends beyond that 3-year eligibility or beyond that annual period, it's not as though you have to start from scratch. Schools are required by law to maintain student records for 5 years upon departure from that school. So if you are living in Illinois and you move to California and then you come back to Illinois 3 years later, the school that you left has to maintain your child's temporary record, which would have all of the special ed information. They have to keep those on record in their district for up to 5 years. So it's easy to recapture where you left off.
Good to know. That's very helpful, I think, for a lot of people. I'm actually seeing some scammers come in, and please do not respond to these links and phone numbers. We have some questions about these cash tags. Please do not respond to those. Those are scams. The last question that I have here for you today, Pepi, what are some, and you might have answered some of these, but I want you to, if you feel like this jogs your memory, maybe you left something off. One of the questions were, what are some creative ways that you're seeing schools and parents collaborating to meet these special education needs of students with identified disabilities that will be receiving this remote learning instruction? And we did talk about some of those. Are there any other tips or resources you might have? I know that some schools are offering for kids, I've heard that maybe they're coming in for a portion of the day because they are individualized. You mentioned you might be getting some group on the side to do some small group work. Any other suggestions or tips that parents could consider in terms of collaborating with their team?
I think the first thing is where we started our conversation, which is about data. So really trying to collaborate with the team, get guidance from the team, as well as using your own specific knowledge of your own child's performance to determine what is reasonable for your family, for your child at that time. I had a family contacted me last week who said that they're trying to follow the school schedule and their child is running out of the room after about 40 minutes. So we developed an alternative schedule that followed the same sequence of events that was going on in the classroom, but we set 20-minute time parameters. The teacher knew in advance, so there was no question like, why is Susie's screen going dark? There was an advanced understanding, so nobody was wondering what was happening. And what changed for the student was they had a successful 20-minute lesson instead of all day long crying after 40 minutes, where their whole day was just a sequence of crying. So we want to build upon success. I think that's the key issue is how can we set students up for success? And it would be better to have a smaller quantity of different lesson activities that all went well, rather than trying to push through for a full day and have it all feel very stressful and uncomfortable for both the student and the parent. But to communicate that in advance, a lot of parents are trying to make it work, and they're not necessarily disclosing what is difficult or hard. They just think, well, we'll try again tomorrow, and we'll push through better tomorrow. Don't try to push through better. Seek assistance so that the time that you are participating in instruction is more successful.
And that really goes to that structure and kind of that documentation. Like as a parent, as a caregiver at home, take notes on where your kids are falling apart. And that's one of the things we dissect as clinicians when we work with families with kids that are having behavioral disruptions. What's the antecedents? What's happening? Is there a particular time of the day that these outbursts are occurring? Is there a particular subject matter that's particularly difficult for the child? And there are some workarounds, like you said, if we can be creative, but the more detailed information I think that we have about where things are stressing the kids, the better we can at problem solving that.
There's a little phrase that is often helpful, and it relates to how we evaluate student work, that students can demonstrate mastery. So if there's 10 problems on the page and they're all addition problems, do we need to do 10 problems to demonstrate mastery, or could we demonstrate mastery with 5? So mastery is the goal. It's the goal for the teacher. It's the goal for the family. But once we've determined that we've demonstrated mastery, we can say that we've accomplished our goal for that lesson.
Yeah, that's a very good
looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah. And kids are learning. I think that's kind of the reassuring piece, is they're learning even though they may not be 40 minutes into it, or they may be not completing 20 problems. They're still learning. And we need to take into account their attention span and their ability level and their need. So thank you for all of these wonderful suggestions. Pepi, are there any recommendations that you have available that you'd like to share that we can post for you or direct to your website? If parents have additional questions, how can they reach you, and what would be the process for them to connect with you if they need some support with their IEP that's in place right now?
Sure. So I offer to any family a free 60-minute consultation appointment. So if you have a couple of questions and you just want to have a conversation about your child and what's going on, setting up a consultation appointment is the best way to do that. And then not only will we talk about what your concerns are for your child, excuse me, but we will also talk about, how advocacy services might be helpful. What I want parents to walk away with is information so that they can continue on their own, or if I can be helpful, that I certainly want to be able to do that.
We've been talking a lot, right? Thank you so much. And we also offer supports for anxiety and behavioral challenges, and we can help work with your team and with Pepi as well. If you have questions, please give us a call. You can reach us on Konick and Associates, so it's www.konickassociates.com. We will have this video posted on our YouTube page. And Pepi, how can they reach you?
So my email address is my first name, Pepi, at B as in bridge, E as in education, and then advocacy, beadvocacy.com. And my web address is www.b as in bridge, E as in education, and then advocacy.com, or Bridge. If you search Bridge Educational Advocacy, I was recently told that our site is the #1 organically searched site. So I'm very proud that families are connected that way.
Great. Good to see you. Thank you for everything. And please feel free to post questions after the fact, and we will certainly make every effort to get back to you. And we will be tuning in for the rest of this month on some additional educational supports. Next week, we're going to be talking about college admission process during COVID. So please tune in. Thank you for your interest, and thank you, Pepi, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.